even in architecture, you can still have people who fantasize about avoiding or escaping the user, by bolting everything to the floor, literally, or making models instead of actual buildings, right? In games, the thing that interests me the most, in games, the problem is constantly there. In a very literal sense, you can't, it doesn't make any sense to produce a fantasy where you don't have to, to think about who's going to be playing. It's hard to say what that would even entail.
Milan ou Tripoli, Vilnius ou Benghazi, Paris, Moscou, on fait le boonga, boonga. Bangkok ou Bogota, Le Caire ou Jakarta, Gustavia, on fait le boonga, boonga. Stockholm ou Monaco, ou Montevideo, Oslo, Tokyo, on fait le boonga, boonga.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Bunga Cast, the global politics podcast at the end of history. I'm Alex Hochuli in Sao Paulo, Brazil, as per usual, joined by fellow Bunga boy George Hoare in London. Hello, George.
Hey.
And we are very happy to welcome today Pawel Kaczmarski, who is a literary critic. He teaches modern and contemporary Polish literature at the University of Wrocław, and has written 2 books about Polish poetry, which is unfortunately a topic we're not going to get onto. Those books are also in Polish. So I wasn't able to prepare enough, basically, for that. So we're going to have to skip that element of today's episode. Instead, what we're going to mainly focus on is an article that Pawel has written for Damage. It's come out on the 1st of April, called The Promise of Video Games. And that'll be a question we'll be inquiring into. I'm just going to cite from it here. Helldivers 2 uses the video game form to raise fundamental questions about agency and intention. Unfortunately, like so much of the culture industry, it ultimately comprises its core message for the typical rewards of the entertainment industry.
Compromises its core message.
What did I say?
You said comprises.
Oh, yeah, I thought compromises makes a lot more sense. It ultimately compromises its core message for the typical rewards of the entertainment industry. So we didn't get the fundamental questions about agency and intention. Instead, we got the usual entertainment industry bullshit. You got that, mate? Got that clear? Okay, good. Well done, Alex. We're going to continue this very professionally. Anyway, hi, Pawel. How's it going?
Hi, very good. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah.
So, I want to ask you how things are going in Poland, and to make that maybe a little bit more specific of a question. There's elections coming up at the end of May, right? So how's that playing out? Are you getting loads of campaign literature through your letterbox? Are there people campaigning on the streets, or are people not very interested in the election?
I think they are sort of to a point. I think the mood just in general is quite pessimistic, but also quite intense in places. It's kind of hard to say. I feel like, in general, we're maybe doing better than some of our neighbors, at least, but still not great. And during this particular election campaign, the 3 main candidates are basically sort of outbidding one another on who's the most business friendly and hates taxes the most. So for someone on the left, it's really not... it's sort of hard to get invested. Whoever wins, it's pretty much going to be almost the same. I mean, the far right candidates is clearly worse than the other 2, but the core message of all of them is surprisingly similar. And the people to the left of the center have a combined 12% in the polls. So right. Yeah.
So I should ask this as well. I mean, unfortunately, we're probably having to ask everyone this on the podcast, at least for these early months of 2025, which is, what's the reception to Trump been like in Poland? Because I think the Polish right were obviously very pro-Trump, but then he goes and blames Ukraine for Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and I'm sure that didn't sit very well with a lot of people in Poland. So how's that playing out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say that the reaction is somewhat mixed. It really depends on whom you ask. Even on the right itself, it's people just generally, I think, feel confused to an extent. And also because it's overlapped with our own election campaign, I don't think there's been a lot of debate around the second Trump term so far. I suspect that post-election, after May 18th and then June the 1st, maybe people will have more time to devote to that. But
interesting.
It's,
so it's not
it's honestly,
It's not being fought out in terms of, Trump. Because, I mean, Poland has been so closely allied and so kind of Western facing for recent decades that I wondered whether that might be polarizing the election in some way, or, like, where do you stand on Trump and so on?
I think people in the center and a large part of the Polish left, like, you have to remember that we're basically all, I don't mean me personally, but almost everyone in Poland is some form of Atlanticist, right? So people in the center and on the left, I think they're more scared of this idea of Trump sort of abandoning the international commitments of the United States. But again, it really kind of depends and varies between people and various, outlets and all that.
Right, interesting. Well, we should probably return to Poland. I realized we've never done an episode on Poland before, not in a dedicated fashion. So that is something to be corrected, and probably should take the opportunity towards the end of May or early June to do that. It's maybe the example of. Yeah, well, and we would love to do that. Maybe we should do that episode from Poland, and talk about the techno-populist synthesis that Poland represents. At least that's the working hypothesis. More on that in a future episode, because now we'll turn to video games. George.
Yeah, so before we were recording, I was doing my best Lana Del Rey impression, singing video games. I won't do it on air. Alex didn't realise that I was actually trying to sing this famous song of Lana's. But
I'm a massive Lana Del Rey fan on top of
but
it.
My vocal limitations notwithstanding, so video games. Shout out to our previous guest, Jonas Kyratzes, episode 161 on gaming and politics, and check out his new game, Talos Principle 2, and his audio drama Gospels of the Flood, which is listen to that this week. Very, very good. Anyway, we've covered video games a little bit, but maybe we do sometimes dip our toe into culture, and I think this is your essay, Pawel, is really a good reminder of that this is an important cultural form. This is something we should take seriously, and it does have a promise, as you kind of frame it in the essay. What is this promise of video games? What is it that listeners should do? I guess I was going to say put down their headphones and pick up their controllers, but maybe they could be playing video games whilst listening to this podcast, if that's not too much multitasking. Anyway, what is the promise of video games? What do they potentially offer us?
Yeah, I think on the basic level, there's a promise that as a player, you will play a more active role than being in a traditional audience, like a passive viewer or listener. That you'll be able to actually do something and become someone in some significantly more real sense, even in the sense of being almost drawn into the structure of the thing at hand, so to speak, the game itself, right? The sort of the idea of immersion, which people talk so much about these days, is very closely linked to that. And the idea that in games it's somehow more easily achieved or maybe more powerful than elsewhere. This idea that you can actually inhabit, like, a fictional world or whatever. So yeah, I think there are various forms, various instances of that, but the idea of being a more active participant, that's the promise.
And is this kind of contrasted, presumably, with, passive, old school? You pick up the novel, here are the characters, you don't inhabit them. You kind of, you can come to know about humanity and the history of the world and all these times that you weren't alive, but the one thing you can't do is really be active and choose the story, those kind of choose your own storybooks, notwithstanding. So is that the kind of, it's that agency, that activeness, that kind of, ability to not just witness a fictional world, but also to inhabit it and to partly shape it.
Yeah, I think I was actually going to mention this later, but I'll say this now. There's this like an early seminal academic work on video games from I believe 1997. It's called Cybertext by Espen Aarseth, where, well, basically in the intro, what he says is that he seems really sort of annoyed, frustrated by the inability of postmodern literary theory to grasp the unique nature of the medium, the uniqueness of games as a form of art, specifically because what he says is that postmodern literary theory sort of sees everything like a game. Like, to them, works of literature are already games in the structure, so they are unable to sort of grasp the distinction there, which I think is very funny that the popularity of games sort of goes hand in hand with the development in culture theory, where people just start seeing everything as games to an extent. But this idea of more active participation is just very, very alluring for some reason.
Yeah, I guess if everything is gamified, then why not why not lean into this? Why try to resist it? So I guess some listeners might be thinking, oh, video games, they're just, unimportant kind of peripheral aspects of, of the cultural field. And I would say to those listeners, think again, because I've heard this argument and I actually find it quite plausible that we're about to enter a kind of the age of the video game movie. So this is the idea that comic book kind of superhero films, which dominated this period, probably 2008 to 2023, have had their day. They've kind of run out of source material. They've overstayed their welcome. Everyone's bored of them now. They're not kind of dominating in the box office the way that they used to. And so instead, we're going to start to see increasingly Hollywood be a kind of video game adaptation machine. So we've already had some Sonic and Mario films, not to mention Mortal Kombat. I think there might be 2 of those, in fact, and there's a Minecraft film at the box office at the moment. But do you kind of find any plausibility in this idea that we're kind of, we're gonna see Hollywood be very clearly downstream of the video game industry? So we're going to see this swathe of American and hence global culture be influenced by these, maybe 10, 20, maybe older video games. This kind of like, I guess, the prestige IP within that culture is going to then, it's going to be spreading, diffusing via these Hollywood films through the whole world.
Well, and also just to tag something on there briefly, there's the more intriguing prospect, perhaps, something presented by this film which has just come out. I think it's available on Movie, which I haven't watched yet. It's called Grand Theft Hamlet. And it's a documentary which follows 2 actors trying to cast and produce a live virtual production of Shakespeare's Hamlet in Grand Theft Auto online while they're stuck at home during the lockdowns. I mean, that's kind of that's intriguing because it's kind of a little bit of an inversion of the dynamic that George was just depicting. I don't know.
Yeah, I think these are actually probably these 2 examples quite close to each other in the sense that they seem to both stem with just a general sort of generational shift, and the fact that, playing games, not necessarily being a gamer, but just playing games in your free time is like a very normal part of your participation in culture for so many people of sort of my and younger generations, right? So I think this will just be happening more and more just because of that, right? Among screenwriters, right? You'll just have more people who are sort of more accustomed to playing games and drawing on them.
Yeah.
And I think what you can also already see is that in so many pieces of fiction, especially like, mainstream ones, maybe more than elsewhere, you'll get this feeling that either certain scenes or tropes or sometimes the plot structure is in a way, video gamey. Like the way the protagonists sort of behave, it almost seems like they're, for instance, collecting quests and fulfilling them. It's kind of hard to pin down sometimes, but you have this thing that some of the tropes and some of the techniques are just straight up taken from video games. And I don't think it's a conscious decision on anyone's part. It's just, it's just what happens after the people who grew up playing video games get jobs in culture.
Well, I mean, I was going to ask you, sorry, George, I was going to ask you, like, what does that mean to kind of ape video games? Because I as someone who doesn't play video games like myself, I'm not exactly sure what that means. But I also have noted that the kind of tropes of video games have also entered into film criticism or just general discussion of like people talking about like a side quest or regen, which I wasn't sure, like I wasn't really clear what that was until I looked it up and I realized, okay, it's like short for regeneration. Anyway, it's these terms that are used to describe the kind of the narrativity of life even, but are taken from video games, which I find intriguing.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely it. It's just becoming, it's just sort of joining all the other media in being a part of like a general cultural vocabulary in certain circles at least. Like it's striking to me that these days when I talk to my my friends in the academia or my colleagues, it's just like people sort of switch from talking films to talking video games almost in a single sentence, and it's just a part of the same conversation largely.
I guess that's part of a wider kind of postmodern removal of the distinction between high and low culture, the kind of, look, the inverse snobbery, or the kind of preemptive anti-snobbery of like, oh, the canon, oh, that's full of old dead white guys, and there's a whole lot more. And if you look down at popular music, at video games, there's something a bit suspect. You're kind of a bit of an elitist, and that's not great. That's not a good look, chief, or whatever the right phrase would be. But anyway, so onto the actual article itself, because in this you talk about one specific game, Helldivers 2, and it seems very much that this is a kind of unofficial Starship Troopers game. And this is, in fact, there's a film that I think really has had an extremely strong staying power. And I actually rewatched it not that recently, and it still, well, I was going to say it still stands up. There's probably some stuff that first time I saw it, I just completely went over my head, and now I actually realize how good a film it is. So this game, Helldivers 2, at the British Film Academy Awards, or BAFTAs, it was nominated for but didn't win the best game, although it did pick up best multiplayer game and best music awards. I guess there's something to be said anyway for there being BAFTAs for video games. But anyway, that's a bit of a side. I was going to say side quest is more of a side point. But could you tell us a little bit about Helldivers 2? Maybe for listeners who haven't played this, or like Alex, they don't, they might not be gamers at their core. What is this? Why is it good? Why should we download this and play it?
Right. So first, let me just put like a little caveat here. I'm not necessarily sure you should play it. I think
Right,
it's interesting
okay.
because it fails in an interesting way. Ultimately, I mean, it's worth. It is interesting for sure. I'm still unsure whether I think it's a good game. That's a whole different question. Maybe we'll go back to that. But it's basically like a shooter game, semi-cooperative, in the sense that you mostly play it with your friends as a kind of a space Nazi. Basically, like you said, it draws on the same general tropes, same general aesthetic as Starship Troopers. It might be a bit, maybe more on the nose, a bit more satiric in an overt way. But yeah, you're an officer of this galactic sort of imperialist fascist regime, and you kill space bags. But the game makes it very clear that the bags, or whomever you fight, they're not really as sort of either evil or alien as they are presented by the official propaganda. And you sort of go on these missions with your friends, and you collect stuff, you progress in building your individual space
Mhm.
Nazi. And yeah, that's the general premise, so to speak.
So I think there is something quite addictive about games like Diablo 3 or 4, I can't remember exactly which one it is that I've played, where basically all you do is you just like, you click on the bad guy, and then they die, and you pick up their loot, and you get the experience points or XP, so you get stronger, so you get just the same, like the baddies get as much stronger as you get stronger. So it's basically just clicking on. I find this. I enjoyed this game. You just click on the bad guys, and then you kill the devil or devil's daughter or whatever. And sorry, I sort of said spoiler alert. Anyway, there is something I think which is extremely, like, the design of these games, the kind of the way that it's all about loot, the way that you kind of are drawn into this accumulation and this kind of I mean, there is it doesn't take a neuroscientist to imagine that there's a kind of probably quite a strong dopamine like loop here, where you are expecting this reward, you get this reward, you get the bigger reward, the rarer items, the more loot, the more powers, etc., etc., etc. I mean, this is a fairly kind of common kind of, I guess, logic of games. So what kind of sets out this game, Helldivers 2? Because it isn't just a click on the bad guys and they die and you collect their loot game. There's a few more elements in the article that you draw out which make it sort of seem much more like it's trying to do something a bit more than just that Diablo click and they die, and then you get more XP.
Yeah, I think the main point I'm trying to make, the reason why I think this particular game is interesting out of all the ones that have been published sort of in the recent years, is that it is in a way a thing, quite an interesting critical commentary on what you just described. This sort of dopamine boosting loot gathering loop, in that it's obviously not the point. It's obviously a part of the satire. The point being, or the meaning that the game, I think, tries to convey through reproducing this loop is that in this particular case, your immediate motivations, the satisfaction you get, the feelings you get, everything that drives you to kill more space bugs or whatever, these are also the immediate motivations of your avatar in game, right? So the idea is that you basically share these immediate goals and the feeling of satisfaction and all that with a Nazi. And I think, that's the interesting part, right? Because it is, I think, to an extent, a commentary on on other games, especially other shooters. And there is like a point about how the usual focus on player empowerment and self-fulfillment and individual experience may just not be as politically innocent as it very often seems, or as games like to think. There's also, I think, like quite an interesting point about fascism itself, where this entire mechanic sort of serves to remind you that the motivations of your typical fascist aren't necessarily, it's not metaphysical evil. They don't even have to be ideological. It's all about just a certain reward and incentive system. So I think this is quite striking, and this actually is also sort of, this is something that this game Helldivers 2 shares with Starship Troopers, right? This idea that it works on a very daily sort of like basic level in these people's lives. But I think on a more general level, what's interesting is that although you can see what Helldivers 2 does as a kind of criticism of other games and their approach to action, it also shows you that there is a critical potential in the very fact that games sort of have this access to action. They have to orient themselves around it in a way, right? So by kind of adopting another angle, they can become a critical tool by thematizing and problematizing action and like specific forms of action.
Hello friends, you've reached the end of a sample from an episode only available to subscribers. We put out 2 episodes a month for free. For access to the rest in its entirety, please join us at patreon.com/bungacast. For $7 a month, subscribers receive original, exclusive episodes with the entirety of the BungaCast cast. That's George Hoare, myself Alex Hochuli, and our contributing editors, Philip Cunliffe, Amber Lee Frost, Catherine Liu, Lee Jones, Alex Gurevich, and Lee Phillips. We've got extended interviews with guests, episodes on current affairs, and original episodes on theory, history, and culture, so as to understand the crises of our times. We also have the BungaCast Reading Club, where Phil, George, and myself present the key books and essays necessary for understanding the world today, how we got here, and where we might be going. Subscribers also get a digital subscription to Damage Magazine, with whom we're partnered, and you can find all this info at patreon.com/bungacast. We do hope you'll join us. These are turbulent times, and ideologically confused ones as well. What we try to do is find political clarity, to move beyond the decadent age of Bunga Bunga.
De A ou pas se taire, Bratislava.